our relationship. I think at that point, things were coming down on us pretty hard, and we started to take care of each other a lot more.
Yeah. We did 72 of those shows.
In the golden age of television, when family variety shows were king, one program really stood out. It was hosted by two clean-cut brothers in matching blazers, a couple of folk singers who charmed America with a simple catchphrase, "Mom always liked you best." They were wholesome. They were safe. At least, that's what the network thought, but under the surface of the brotherly bickering and catchy songs, a revolution was brewing. This wasn't just another comedy hour. It was a battleground. And one moment, a scene that many people at the time probably just saw as an awkward stumble or a weird blooper, was actually a carefully aimed shot in a war that would get the #1 show in the country fired. This is the story of how the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour took on the censors, the president, and the entire establishment. It's the story of how one scene, that you were never supposed to fully understand, revealed the truth hiding behind all the laughter. It was a moment of pure defiance that blew the lid off television and created a free speech legacy that we still feel today. To get what really happened, you have to look again. On April 4, 1969, one of the most popular shows on TV just vanished. It wasn't because of bad ratings. In fact, it was a huge hit, especially with younger folks. It wasn't because the stars walked out. It was because a mysterious tape showed up at CBS headquarters, and what was on that tape sent the executives into a full-blown panic. 6 days later, the show was gone, replaced by a corny country program called Hee Haw. There was no big farewell episode, no explanation to the millions of fans. CBS just claimed the brothers failed to get the episode in on time for review. But the real reason was buried on that final, unaired tape. It contained a scene so explosive, so direct in its criticism of the powerful, that the network decided it was just easier to kill the show than to let it air. This wasn't just a cancellation, it was an execution. And it all started with two brothers who were supposed to be the safest bet on television. To really get how explosive the Smothers Brothers became, you have to understand just how harmless they seemed at first. Tom and Dick Smothers were folk singers whose entire act was built around a simple gimmick: sibling rivalry. Tom, the older brother, played this slow-witted, goofy man-child, always interrupting with a confused, "Wait a second," or whining that, "Mom always liked you best." Dick, the younger one, was the smooth, serious straight man, constantly rolling his eyes at his brother. They were charming, they were funny, and most of all, they were non-threatening. Their comedy came from old vaudeville traditions. They even cited Laurel and Hardy as a big influence. They wore suits, sang folk songs, and seemed a million miles away from the chaos gripping America in the mid-1960s. In 1967, CBS was in trouble. On Sunday nights, they were getting absolutely destroyed in the ratings by NBC's monster hit, The Western Bonanza. Every show they threw up against the Cartwright family failed miserably. CBS needed something new, something that could pull in a different crowd. They needed something hip, but not too hip. They looked at Tom and Dick Smothers, who had a bunch of successful comedy albums and guest appearances, and thought they were the perfect answer. The brothers were popular with younger people but were still clean-cut enough for the older generation. So, the network offered them a 1-hour variety show, putting them right up against Bonanza. The expectation was that they'd probably fail like everyone else, but it was a gamble worth taking. Dick Smothers later remembered the network's attitude: "Everybody got killed against Bonanza, so we said we wanted to be socially relevant, and they said, okay, anything you want." At first, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour played by the rules. You had your comedy sketches, your musical guests, and the brothers' classic banter. But then, slowly, something started to change. Tom Smothers, the dim-witted one, was actually the political engine behind the show. He saw their platform not just as a way to entertain, but as a way to actually say something about the world. He started to push the envelope, subtly at first, and then with a lot more nerve. The show hired a group of young, brilliant, and deeply countercultural writers. We're talking about future comedy legends like Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, and a guy named Lorne Michaels, who would, go on to create Saturday Night Live. This writer's room was buzzing with new ideas, and they started writing sketches that went way beyond the usual mother-in-law jokes of the time. The show became a stage for political satire and social commentary, hitting topics that were totally taboo for primetime: the Vietnam War, civil rights, racism, you name it. And it wasn't just the comedy. The musical guests were a who's who of the counterculture. While other shows were booking safe, middle-of-the-road singers, the Smothers brothers brought on The Who, Jefferson Airplane, The Doors, and Buffalo Springfield. These weren't just performances, they were statements. The Who famously ended My Generation by smashing all their instruments, with an overloaded explosive in Keith Moon's drum kit that supposedly set Pete Townshend's hair on fire and permanently damaged his hearing. The Beatles chose the show to debut their new, promotional films, what we now call music videos, for Hey Jude and Revolution. This wasn't your parents' variety show anymore. It was becoming the voice of a generation, a bridge between the mainstream and the counterculture. And the network, which had just wanted a safe, sacrificial lamb, suddenly had a massive, controversial hit on its hands. They were finally beating Bonanza in the ratings, but they were quickly realizing they'd created a monster they couldn't control. The battle started almost right away. Back in the 1960s, TV wasn't the Wild West it is today. Network censors, a department with the friendly name, Program Practices, had immense power. Their job was to make sure nothing got on the air that could offend viewers, advertisers, or anyone powerful in politics. The Smothers Brothers' content, which was designed to be provocative, put them on a direct collision course with these gatekeepers. One of the first huge fights was over the legendary folk singer Pete Seeger. In 1967, Seeger was invited for the show's Season 2 premiere. This was a big deal all by itself. Seeger had been blacklisted from TV for 17 years because of his political activism. He decided to sing a song called Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, a powerful allegory about a captain during World War II who leads his platoon into a dangerously deep river, ignoring his sergeant's warnings. The captain drowns, and the song ends with a very pointed lyric: "Now every time I read the papers, that old feeling comes on, we're waist deep in the big muddy and the big fool says to push on." Everyone knew the big fool was President Lyndon B. Johnson and his escalation of the Vietnam War. CBS demanded the song be cut. Tom Smothers said no. The network cut it anyway, but Tom didn't just let it go. He leaked the story to the press, and the public outcry was so huge that CBS had to back down. They invited Seeger back on the show 5 months later, and on February 25, 1968, millions of Americans watched him perform the song, completely uncensored. It was a massive victory and a clear sign that the Smothers Brothers were willing to fight, not just for a punchline, but for the principle of free speech. The Seeger incident opened the floodgates. The fights with the censors became a weekly thing, a real cat-and-mouse game. Comedian Pat Paulson started a recurring bit where he ran a deadpan, satirical campaign for president, mocking the empty promises of real politicians with slogans like, "If elected, I will win." It was hilarious, but it also hit a little too close to home for the political establishment. Joan Baez, a major anti-war activist, came on the show and wanted to dedicate a song to her husband, David Harris, who was about to go to jail for refusing to serve in the military. CBS let her say he was in prison but cut out the reason why, which made the dedication totally meaningless. Harry Belafonte performed a joyful calypso song while violent news footage from the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago played behind him. The network found the contrast too disturbing and cut the entire 5-minute performance. Every week, it was a new fight. The censors objected to the phrase, sex education. They objected to a joke where a character was called a known heterosexual. The list of forbidden topics just got longer and more absurd. It became pretty clear to Tom Smothers that the network wasn't just afraid of offending a few people. They were afraid of anyone challenging authority. As Tom said in an interview, "I found myself speaking up for things you've never thought about, they were just ethically correct, morally right. Then all of a sudden we were in trouble and it turned out, it made us famous." The brothers and their writers started to see the censorship itself as comedy material. They began writing sketches about the censorship they were dealing with. But this meta-commentary was, in a lot of ways, even more dangerous than the political jokes. It wasn't just a critique of the war or the president anymore, it was a direct shot at CBS. They were trying to show the audience the bars of their own cage. And that led them to the scene that would become the point of no return. The title of this video mentions a blooper, but the most pivotal moment wasn't a mistake at all. It was a brilliantly written sketch, so deliberate and so sharp in its criticism that the network flat out refused to air it. If you were just watching casually, it might have seemed weird or awkward, like a piece of performance art that didn't really land. But to get its true meaning is to understand the entire fight. The moment we need to look at again is a sketch written by and starring the brilliant comedian Elaine May back in 1967. The setup was simple. Tom Smothers and Elaine May are playing a pair of network censors who are reviewing a script. The whole point of the sketch was to show how absurd the censorship process was. As they read the script, May's character objects to the most harmless words. She insists that the word breast in a love scene is too suggestive and has to be changed. They then go through this ridiculous list of replacements: chest, upper body, front porch. And each one gets funnier and more ridiculous than the last. The sketch was a masterpiece of satire. It showed how the act of censoring often creates meanings that are way more suggestive and silly than the original words. In another version of a similar sketch, May's character, the censor, reads a growing list of topics you can't talk about on TV: war, religion, injustice, until she finally just tears up the script in frustration, declares, "If we're not allowed to say anything important, we're just fooling you with empty jokes," and walks off stage in silence. This wasn't just a funny sketch. It was a declaration of war. The brothers were using their own show to pull back the curtain and show the audience exactly how the machine worked. As one of their writers, Mason Williams, guessed, one of the things CBS didn't like about the Elaine May show was that we pointed out that there were censors and gave them a persona. They were turning this faceless, bureaucratic process into a character that could be openly mocked. CBS refused. Air the sketch. The irony was just staggering. A sketch about censorship was, itself, censored. But Tom Smothers, in a move that showed how smart he was getting in his PR battle with the network, leaked the script to the New York Times. Suddenly, this behind-the-scenes fight was front-page news. The battle wasn't about a single joke or song anymore. It was about the fundamental right to speak and to criticize the people who want to silence you. Censoring the Elaine May sketch proved the sketch's entire point more powerfully than broadcasting it ever could have. This moment, this scene, is the key. It wasn't a blooper. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated act of defiance. The network wanted you to think these moments were mistakes, just weird, unfunny sketches that deserved to be cut. But looking at it again, we see it for what it was, the moment the Smothers brothers stopped just making jokes about the establishment and started attacking the very foundation of network control. From that point on, the relationship between the show and the network was broken beyond repair. CBS wasn't dealing with two friendly folk singers anymore. They were dealing with rebels who were using the network's own airwaves to expose its hypocrisy. And the clock started ticking. By the start of the third season in the fall of 1968, the war between the Smothers brothers and CBS was completely out in the open. The network, desperate to get control back, made a new rule. The brothers had to deliver a finished tape of every episode to the censors a full 10 days before it aired. This would give the network plenty of time to scrub anything they didn't like. Tom Smothers didn't see this as a guideline, he saw it as a challenge. He started playing a dangerous game, deliberately delivering tapes as late as possible so the censors had less time to make changes. Sometimes, he'd even send a safe version for them to review, only to swap in the real, controversial stuff at the last minute before it went on air. The tension finally boiled over with a new regular on the show, a young comedian named David Steinberg. Steinberg, the son of a rabbi, performed these satirical sermonettes that used Bible stories to comment on politics and social issues. His first one in October 1968, a take on Moses and the burning bush, triggered hundreds of angry letters from viewers who thought it was blasphemous. CBS was swamped with complaints. Several affiliate stations in the South threatened to drop the show completely. The network was terrified, despite the backlash, and against direct warnings from CBS executives, Tom Smothers was determined to have Steinberg back. That decision was the final straw. In early April 1969, the team produced what would be their final episode. It was set to air on April 13 and, true to form, it was packed with everything the network hated. It had Mary Travers from Peter, Paul and Mary singing a song called "No More Promised Lands," which told young people to reject the government's empty promises. But the centerpiece was another David Steinberg sermonette. This time, Steinberg was telling the story of the prophet Jonah, who was told by God to go to Nineveh and tell the people they had sinned. Steinberg's Jonah refuses, saying, "I have a feeling he knows." The punchlines were sharp, the commentary was biting, and everyone knew the target was President Richard Nixon. When the sermonette ended, Steinberg threw his prop shawl into the audience and yelled, "Peace not war, preach it." The tape was delivered to CBS. The reaction was immediate and absolute. The network refused to air the episode. On April 4, 1969, William S. Paley, the powerful head of CBS, personally made the call to cancel the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. The official reason they gave the public was that the brothers had failed to deliver the final tape in time for review, which was a breach of their contract. Tom Smothers fiercely denied this, claiming the tape was delivered on time to the censors in Hollywood but was deliberately held up by executives in New York. It didn't matter. The decision was made. The most daring, popular, and culturally important show on television was gone. Viewers who tuned in the next week expecting to see Tom and Dick were instead greeted by the twangy guitars and barnyard jokes of hee-haw. The controversial final episode was never shown in the United States, though it did air in Canada, where it was beyond the reach of CBS censors. The silence from the network was deafening. The message was clear: you can be popular, you can win awards, but if you challenge the system will erase you. The story of the Smothers Brothers is such a critical piece of television history and a powerful reminder of the risks people took to push for free speech. If you think these are the kinds of stories that need to be told, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sharing this video really helps make sure this history isn't forgotten and lets us bring you more deep dives into the moments that changed everything. Your support genuinely makes a difference. Now, let's talk about the incredible legacy that came out of this cancellation. The cancellation of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was a huge blow. Tom and Dick Smothers were effectively blacklisted. Tom, especially, was branded as too risky and too controversial for network TV. The career they had built was just shattered overnight. But they didn't go down without a fight. They filed a breach of contract lawsuit against CBS, arguing that the whole missed deadline thing was just a flimsy excuse for political censorship. After 4 long years, in 1973, a federal court ruled in their favor. The court ordered CBS to pay the brothers over $776,000. It was a moral victory, but as Tom Smothers pointed out, it was never really about the money. He said, "I don't think people are going to be willing to say what they think if they know they're going to be penalized for it." They had won the battle in court, but they had lost the war for their show. Their TV careers never really got back to where they were. They hosted a few other short-lived shows, but that spark and that sense of danger from the original Comedy Hour were gone. For a while, it looked like the network had won, like they had successfully made an example out of them. They had proven that the house always wins, but the legacy of their show is not one of failure. It's one of a deep and lasting impact. The Smothers brothers were the trailblazers. They were the ones who took the arrows so that others could charge forward. Their constant battles against censorship kicked the door down for a whole new kind of television. Shows like All in the Family and MAS*S*H*, which showed up just a few years later, would tackle the exact same controversial subjects, war, politics, social change, that had gotten the Smothers brothers fired. The ground had been broken. The conversation had started, and maybe their most direct legacy can be seen every Saturday night. Lorne Michaels, who got one of his first big writing jobs on the Comedy Hour, has said flat out that his own revolutionary show, Saturday Night Live, would not exist without the Smothers brothers. He once said that without them, there would be no SNL. The Smothers brothers proved that there was a huge, young audience that was hungry for comedy that was smart, satirical, and actually relevant. They showed that political commentary wasn't just for stuffy news shows, it could be a core part of mainstream entertainment. SNL, The Daily Show, John Oliver, Stephen Colbert, the entire family tree of modern political satire stands on the shoulders of Tom and Dick Smothers. Decades later, the same establishment that had kicked them out started to recognize their importance. In 2008, the Television Academy gave Tom Smothers a special honorary Emmy. In his acceptance speech, he didn't gloat or take anything back. He just quietly said, "Peace is harder than war," a powerful statement that summed up the entire fight. In 2010, both brothers were inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame, a final acknowledgement of what they gave to the medium. The story of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour and its fiery end is more than just TV trivia. It's a crucial chapter in the ongoing fight for freedom of expression. It reminds us that laughter can be a weapon, that comedy can speak truth to power, and that sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do is just refuse to be quiet. They may have been fired, but their influence was never cancelled. Their echo is still heard today, in every late-night monologue that dares to question authority, and in every sketch that pushes the boundaries of what we're allowed to laugh at. They lost their show, but they changed television forever.